It's Wednesday, July 29th, 2009, and it's got to be 420 somewhere in the world. I'm your host, Radical Russ Belville. Produced and distributed by the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws in Washington, D.C., this is your normal daily audio stash, the growing truth about cannabis. Welcome to the most popular podcast regarding marijuana in all of America and all the world, featuring interviews with scientists, politicians, doctors, prohibition policy activists, regular cannabis consumers, musicians, and NORML staff and NORML's board of directors, along with music and comedy no other podcast can offer. You can always find out more about our show at our website, stash.normal.org, and continue the education and conversation on our blog as well. We're ending marijuana prohibition with education, one listener at a time. The podcasting and blogging technology for the NORML Daily Audio Stash is provided by Red Aphid Interactive Media. For your professional web design needs, visit redaphid.com. Good day, Stashers, and welcome to the podcast. I'm still furiously raising money for the upcoming NORML Show Live launch. Got a great bunch of donations from folks at the Stash. And also, we've been talking with High Times Magazine for some major sponsorship, so that's looking pretty positive. And you may have heard the ad from last night for the El Jefe Hot Wings contest. I'm being sponsored by Herb Age Designs, and you can pledge per wing for my entry in the contest. So, $1 per wing. I'm planning on eating 20 of them. That'd be $20, or whatever you decide you can spare, all the way down to $0.25 per wing, which would be about $5 if I eat all 20. The contest is August 28th, not April, as I wrote in the blog in a hurry. And we'll be filming it for presentation here on stash.normal.org and the NORML YouTube channel, so you can get a laugh out of making me eat 20 extremely hot chicken wings. Time for some NORML shout-outs. It's a NORML shout-out. Received a phone call today from a young man in South Carolina who's trying to get in touch with the existing South Carolina chapters and having some difficulty, as am I. So I'm looking for folks in South Carolina who want to get involved with ending adult marijuana prohibition. Send me an email at stash@normal.org, and I'll put you in touch with the other South Carolinians I've spoken with. I've also talked about how next weekend, August 8th, I'll be in Boise, Idaho at the Flying Pie Pizza trying to form a Boise NORML from 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. local time. I got some emails today from northern Idaho in the Hayden area and in the Lewiston area, also looking to start NORML chapters. It's quite a distance from Boise, so if anyone out there is in the northern Idaho area and would like to get involved in forming a NORML chapter, let me know about it. Brandon from Kansas City NORML called to talk about the NORML chapters in Kansas, or the lack thereof. Of course, he's in Kansas City, which is right there on the border of Kansas and Missouri, and he wanted to encourage all the folks in Kansas who'd like to form a chapter to send me an email at stash@normal.org, and he'd be glad to help out and mentor them in getting a NORML chapter started in Kansas. Also, next door in Nebraska, we got some folks emailing us from Nebraska. You are one of the initiative states, one of 26 in this country, that can pass their own citizen initiatives, and someone asked me about a medical marijuana initiative for Nebraska. It's a great idea, but you gotta crawl before you can run. Let's get you some NORML chapters set up in Nebraska, and then we'll talk about putting together a medical marijuana initiative. And finally, the state of Vermont emailed me today looking for a NORML chapter. This was a lawyer in Vermont who's looking to get involved, so he'd be a great member to have on your board of directors if you wanted to form a Vermont NORML. As always, send me an email at stash@normal.org and we'll get you hooked up. Now, coming up on today's Daily Audio Stash, we begin with the hemp headlines and a look at a former Reagan administration official who is now expressing regrets for supporting the raise of the drinking age to 21 years old. We've got a special announcement about our first chapter in a United States Caribbean territory. Mexican President Felipe Calderón is facing a lot of pressure over his failure to control the violence in Mexico's drug war. And in Stupid Stoner Stories, we feature the police this time in a story called Undercover Narcs Bust Undercover Narc. Today is Wednesday, so of course we've got our Cannabis Science segment with Dr. Mitch Earleywine. He's going to answer your questions on sleep apnea and my questions on athletic performance and cannabis. For our daily Toker Tunes, brought to you by MarijuanaMusicAwards.com, we've got Reggae Wednesday and Jaw Roots with the song Roll Up That Spliff. And in our normal newsmaker segment, we speak with fourth-year medical student Dr. Sunil Aggarwal and his recent paper on the future of cannabinoid medicine in the United States. All that and more coming up on your normal daily audio stash.
Hello, I'm Paul Stanford from the Hemp and Cannabis Foundation, or THCF. Medical marijuana is legal in 13 states today, and THCF has clinics in 8 of those states. Our doctors help qualified patients obtain an authorization for medical marijuana in their state. Patients are eligible for medical marijuana with a history of either severe chronic pain and or nausea, cancer, AIDS or HIV, hepatitis, glaucoma, seizure disorders like epilepsy, chronic muscle spasms such as multiple sclerosis or asthma, neurodegenerative diseases such as Alzheimer's, and gastrointestinal disorders like IBS or Crohn's disease. If you or someone you know has one of these conditions, our doctors will help you obtain a permit for medical marijuana. THCF Medical Clinics has offices in Washington State, Oregon, California, Colorado, Hawaii, Nevada, Montana, and now Michigan. Call 1-800-723-0188 or go to the web at hemp.org or 1-800-723-0188.
Now it's time to take a look at the latest stories about marijuana from news organizations across America and around the world in our normal daily audio stash, Hemp Headlines. Substance abuse expert regrets raising drinking age. From the Los Angeles Times. One of the people who was instrumental in pushing for laws to increase the legal drinking age to 21 now calls his actions, quote, the single most regrettable decision, end quote, of his career. Dr. Morris Chaffetz, a psychiatrist who was on the presidential commission in the 1980s that recommended raising the drinking age to 21, made his remarks in an editorial that he is shopping for publication and which he released to the advocacy group Choose Responsibility. Chaffetz wrote the editorial to mark the 25th anniversary of the law that was signed by President Ronald Reagan on July 17, 1984. Chaffetz said in the piece, quote, legal age 21 has not worked. To be sure, drunk driving fatalities are lower now than they were in 1982, but they are lower in all age groups. And they have declined just as much in Canada, where the age is 18 or 19, as they have in the United States, end quote. Chaffetz said the law instead has resulted in, quote, collateral off-road damage, end quote, such as binge drinking that occurs in underage youth and crimes like date rape, assaults, and property damage. NORML doesn't take a stand on the use of other drugs other than to report scientific and medical facts about them. For instance, MSNBC. Alcohol abuse kills some 75,000 Americans each year and shortens the lives of these people by an average of 30 years, a U.S. government study suggested Thursday. Excessive alcohol consumption is the third leading cause of preventable death in the United States after tobacco use and poor eating and exercise habits. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, which published the study, estimated that 35,000 people in 2001 died from cirrhosis of the liver, cancer, and other diseases linked to drinking too much beer, wine, and spirits. Another 40,000 died from car crashes and other mishaps caused by excessive alcohol use. We also like to remind you that cannabis is a far safer substance for your body and for society, and its greatest harm is caused by its prohibition. NORML forms first chapter in United States Virgin Islands. NORML is proud to announce the formation of its first Caribbean territory chapter in the United States Virgin Islands. USVI NORML will be working to change marijuana laws in the territory to respect the residents and tourists who choose to consume cannabis responsibly. Linda Adler, the founding executive director, is seeking to make the islands a prime destination for tourists from the mainland's 13 medical marijuana states who lack protection for their medical use when vacationing. Hawaii's medical marijuana law does not recognize medical recommendations from other states. Quote, "This is heavily about tourism," she says. "We are planning to include wording that not only allows someone with a state-issued medical card to come and use, but those worldwide travelers that come to the Virgin Islands coming from legal countries will be able to get a temporary card for their stay, providing they bring required documentation. Just the decriminalization aspect of what we are pushing will allow any tourist to partake and risk only a civil fine of about $150 for up to 2 ounces of cannabis," Adler continues. Tourism makes up 70% of the gross domestic product for the U.S. Virgin Islands. We will, as a chapter, promote before and after the fact to the domestic and international pro-cannabis sectors, both for financial support to get the law changed, but then to promote safe tourism for the so inclined tourists. End quote. Also a part of Adler's plans, should they succeed with decriminalization in the islands, is the building of a NORML St. Thomas Hotel, a resort destination open only to NORML members, who may join at the front desk, that caters to the needs of a cannabis-friendly clientele and returns a substantial donation for NORML annually. Virgin Islands residents interested in joining with USVI NORML can contact Linda at lovingadler@gmail.com. More information can be found on the web at myspace.com/USVI NORML. Mexican president facing pressure to change drug war tactics. From the Washington Post. Mexico City. President Felipe Calderón is under growing pressure to overhaul a U.S.-backed anti-narcotics strategy that many political leaders and analysts said is failing amid spectacular drug cartel assaults against the government. There are now sustained calls in Mexico for a change in tactics, even from allies within Calderón's political party, who say the deployment of 45,000 soldiers to fight the cartels is a flawed plan that relies too heavily on the blunt force of the military to stem soaring violence and lawlessness. U.S. and Mexican government officials say the military strategy, while difficult, is working. Since Calderón took office in December 2006, authorities have arrested 76,000 suspected drug traffickers at all levels and have extradited 187 cartel members to the United States. Calderón's security advisors said they have few options beside the army, as they just begin to vet and retrain the police forces they say will ultimately take over the fight. Drug-related deaths during the 2.5 years of Calderón's administration passed 12,000 this month. Rather than shrinking or growing weaker, the Mexican cartels are using their wealth and increasing power to expand into Central America, cocaine-producing regions of the Andes, and maritime trafficking routes in the Eastern Pacific, according to law enforcement authorities. Think about that. In 30 months, there are almost triple the number of civilian deaths in Mexico compared to U.S. military deaths in Iraq in 77 months. This is a fascinating piece at the Washington Post. I've got the link up at stash.normal.org. You should click over and read the whole thing. It also takes a look at how the cartels have won the hearts and minds of the people by playing Robin Hood and taking care of their increasingly impoverished neighborhoods. Mr. Calderón, Mr. Obama, the war against supply and demand is one you cannot win.
Stupid Stoner Stories.
As a public service, NORML reminds you that smoking marijuana will not make one stupid. However, some stupid people do smoke marijuana. Don't be one of those stoners that make the rest of us look bad. Learn your lesson from today's
Stupid Stoner Story.
Undercover narcs arrest undercover narc. Today's stupid stoner story doesn't actually involve any real stoners, as far as I know. But the cops in this story were trying to bust stoners.
Metro UK. In a triumph of covert police work, undercover officers in North Carolina arrested another undercover officer from a different force force after buying drugs off him. The entirely drug dealer-free drug deal occurred when undercover officers from the Statesville Police Department met a man interested in selling them some marijuana. The man was an undercover deputy from Iredell County Sheriff's Office. Statesville is the county seat of Iredell County. The Statesville officers apparently became suspicious that the drug dealer was, in fact, an undercover deputy, so they rang the narcotics unit of the sheriff's office to check. They were told that the dealer was definitely not an undercover deputy. They promptly arrested the man before officers from the sheriff's office arrived and confirmed that the man was, in fact, an undercover deputy. He was then released. Sheriff Phil Redmond told the Statesville Record and Landmark, quote, "We had several large-scale operations going on at once, and the wires got crossed on this one," end quote. Statesville Police Chief Tom Anderson said, quote, "It was a learning experience. Fortunately, nobody was hurt," end quote.
Well, no one except the taxpayers of Iredell County, North Carolina, who just paid for at least 3 to 5 officers' time wasted trying to bust people for selling a weed. Did you know that only 13% of all burglaries and car thefts result in an arrest by police? That only 46% of all violent crimes are solved by police? Meanwhile, one county cop is trying to fool some other city cops into buying some weed, and some more county cops have to sort it all out. Anybody feel any safer? NormalCon 2009, Yes We Cannabis, September 24th through 26th, 2009, in San Francisco, California.
The war on drugs has been an utter failure, and I think that we need to rethink and decriminalize our marijuana laws.
President Obama was right in 2004, and 5 years later, the American people agree.
As regards to legalization, it's not in the president's vocabulary, and it's not in mine.
We're working hard to make sure legalization is in the drug czar's vocabulary.
Whether legalizing marijuana would improve the economy, the answer is no. I don't think that is a good strategy.
There's nothing funny about legalization, Mr. President. Registration, sponsorships, and vending information is available at NORML.org or by calling 888-67-NORMAL. Who is telling you the truth about marijuana? The government? Scientists? Doctors? Which claims are scientifically valid and which claims
Are reefer madness.
Every Wednesday, we separate the stems of propaganda from the buds of truth with Normal's look at
Cannabis science.
Well, it's time for some more cannabis science, and today we get to look at some questions that have been sent in by some of our readers. And of course, joining us as always from the State University of New York at Albany is Dr. Mitch Earleywine. Welcome back, Doctor.
Hello.
Well, yes, we're sweltering out here in Portland, Oregon. Got our triple-digit heats, but we're going to be okay for the interview, I believe. We had a question, and I forwarded it to you, and I thought your answer was really nice, but something we should share with the rest of the listeners. And it was a person who had written in about sleep apnea, this condition where you have trouble sleeping because of your airway obstruction. And he was wondering about the use of cannabis therapy as a way of treating that. And just let folks know what you had to say to him.
Well, the bottom line on this is there's not a ton of published literature, of course, but sleep apnea can be really serious, and it can disturb your sleep in general, and then you're groggy and irritable and everything the next day can actually lead to subsequent depression. If you've got a history of bipolar, it could actually create a manic episode. I mean, it's really a condition that you want to get investigated. A lot of folks tend to get it simply because they're just too heavy, which is kind of sad news, but seems to contribute. So if you are overweight, that can often increase sleep apnea. The bottom line is doing anything you can to improve the quality of sleep seems to also decrease some of this outrageous symptoms. So if you've got good, what they call essentially sleep hygiene, that seems to help a lot. So if you only use your bed for sex and sleeping, if you have a little ritual you do right before you go to bed, so you have your little brush your teeth and wash your face and those kinds of things, that seems to help. Going to bed at the same time every night, whether it's a weekend or a weekday, seems to help a lot. Getting regular exercise, but not in the last 4 hours before bedtime. All of these things seem to contribute. With cannabis, the results from people's reports are mixed, but I think it's probably a strain-related issue. Some of the cannabinoids seem to really enhance sleep. Other ones, and everybody's had this strain that's a real get-up-and-go kind, seem to really make sleep impossible. And linking that to individual cannabinoids has been tough, in part because we just can't get the funding for it. Mm-hmm. So I would say the problem is often, can you get the same strain over and over again? Those of you who are lucky enough to live in a medical cannabis state where you've got a provider who can point you towards that kind of strain, well, that's probably got a lot of potential, but I want to emphasize that these sleep hygiene things are also huge contributors to improving sleep and have the potential to decrease sleep apnea as well.
Yeah, it's something I was thinking about too, is it really wouldn't matter what kind of sativa or indica you have. If you're, living in a walk-up flat next to the railroad station, and the alarms are going off. I mean, a lot of this has to do with your environment, of course. I recommend a nice indica, a glass of warm milk, and some C-SPAN. That'll knock you out.
That'll put you to sleep, but you might have some nightmares.
Yeah, depending on who's on. That's true.
A copy of the Nicomachean Ethics has worked wonders for me.
There we go. Another topic that has come up here, and I thought we'd address this, is here in my home state of Oregon. We're one of the medical marijuana states that has a very fixed list of conditions for which you can qualify for medical use of marijuana. The typical ones: cancer, HIV, Hep C, spastic disorders, nausea, etc. But what we're lacking in our code is any sort of coverage of psychological disorders like PTSD, anxiety, depression, and so on. California, of course, has the open language that says for any disease or condition for which they feel marijuana will be helpful. Currently, we're having meetings now to try to get these psychological conditions added to Oregon's list, and I was wondering if you could point us to the research that would help bolster that case.
It's funny because I'm a bit of an outlier in the cannabis movement on some of these. My impression of the depression literature, for example, does not make me a big fan of any pharmacological treatments. I am really, really pleased with some of the simple 12-session programs done with a psychologist that often take a look at, what are your activities each day and what are your cognitions, how do you tend to look at the world, and in 3 months of hard work, folks seem to do remarkably well without any kind of medication. Nevertheless, I've published data, and so have other folks, pretty definitively saying cannabis certainly seems to have a great impact on mood, some of the obvious problems eating associated with depression, and other symptoms that people seem to report. But my first line of defense is really a behavioral one. When you talk to depressive clients and find out what they're doing in the day, it's like, well, I sit home all day in the dark with the blinds down and everything else. It's like, no wonder you're depressed. I mean, often it's as simple as doing a whole lot of fun things, and it's got a elaborate name, behavioral activation theory. But if you sit down and look at your day and realize there's nothing fun planned every single day in a row, what a surprise. For PTSD, this is also extremely controversial. The most effective treatment we have for PTSD right now is a behavioral one, and it has to do with sitting down and writing about the trauma, talking about the trauma, and essentially learning how to relax and walk through all these things that have happened. Again, about 3 months of really grueling work, but once you're done, you're really done. And that's been a phenomenal set of results, spearheaded by a whole lot of neat folks. And given all the folks we got coming back right now from various foreign countries with these symptoms, I think it's important to get that front and center. That said, the clinical reports, the sort of anecdotal things I've seen, people claim time and again that cannabis seems to help them. I do feel like that we do need a little more research in this area, and I'm actually hoping to do some myself, and we'll see what happens. But again, if you're connected at the VA or you've got a therapist who you're comfortable with, walking through these kinds of exposure treatments seems to be our first line of defense. If the use of cannabis will make that easier for you, or you think that might make you more open to that procedure, then by all means. I haven't seen a ton of negative consequences associated.
My recommendation when people come up and talk about depression is a puppy, but for each their own. One other topic that I thought would be interesting to discuss here is the return of Michael Phelps to the swimming pool, of course, competitive swimming, where he's been, winning events and even setting a few more world records. And as he's been discussing this and been on the media and other shows, and they refer to his famous, picture of being caught with a marijuana bong, his statements always seem to be, I've learned to be smarter about who I hang out with. I've learned to never make that mistake. I made a mistake I shouldn't make. But never has he denied, that he's going to continue using cannabis. And we don't know one way or another if he is. But I was just wondering, now that he's out there in the pool and setting world records again, is there any way we can definitively say that marijuana is either not hurting his performance, or is there any evidence to say that marijuana may actually help performance athletically in some way?
This is obviously a really curious topic, and I haven't cheered for a swimmer this loudly since Mark Spitz's days. So it's a delight for me to see Michael Phelps flourishing this way. I'm disappointed that the media has sort of cornered him on this topic, and as you can imagine, his urine screens must be frequent and severe. The data on cannabis and athletic performance is limited. What I often get is the sports that require a little more daring, a little more disinhibition, and a little improved ability to ignore pain are the ones where individual athletes are willing to say, yes, in fact, this does help me out. As, no surprise to anyone, the snowboarders are quite enamored with the plant. Skiers have also mentioned that, the ability to really go down and go for it, to just head right out and make it happen, seems to be enhanced if they've sort of thought it through previously, often in the plant's glow, so to speak, and kind of visualized it in their minds to make it happen that way. I obviously do not recommend, immediately after use, anybody going into any of these settings, because I'm be concerned about some kind of, potential for injury, which could really be a career-ending sort of thing. But the notion that intermittent cannabis use would somehow impair any of these performances, even in the sports where, big lung capacity is an issue, just turn to your vaporizer and this shouldn't be a problem at all.
And that was just some of the theories in discussions with some people. They talked about how perhaps, someone like Ricky Williams as an NFL running back, we talk about how marijuana supposedly has this time distortion, and that maybe that allows him to quicker or be able to quicker evaluate the running lanes in a football field. Other people have talked about Michael Phelps and, building up lung capacity from big bong hits might build up lung capacity for swimming. I always think those are just kind of silly things to think, but is there anything to that?
The time distortion effects during intoxication are well documented, but unfortunately, complex reaction time is also a little bit impaired depending on which data you look at. So I can't say if immediately prior to the sport that would be any help. A lot of these athletes point out that they've got a really stressful life, and even I work with the binge drinking athletes here, and the problem is you look at their schedules and it's like they have no time to party. It's work, train, go to bed. And I completely understand how a little mini vacation spent with the plant could be a wonderful way to sort of get your mind off some of these incredible pressures associated, especially in pro sports.
Mm-hmm. Wow. And I would think also compared to a lot of the anti-inflammatories and painkillers that they're given almost, it seems, on a routine basis by team doctors and trainers, that it would probably be a more healthy choice for them to make in the long term.
Well, and in fact can combat some of the side effects. A lot of these drugs are really nausea-inducing, outrageously so. And so the opportunity to, alleviate some of that so you can get your rest, which is essential during training, has got to be something that people have to keep in mind.
Well, all interesting questions, and we encourage everyone out there listening, if you've got a question for Dr. Mitch Earleywine, you can send it in to 420research@gmail.com, and maybe we'll bring it up here on the show. And Dr. Earleywine joins us every Wednesday for our Cannabis Science segment, and forthcoming on the NORML show live once we get that launched. So we're looking forward to some live discussions there. Thanks for joining us, Dr. Earleywine. We appreciate you every time you join us here on the Daily Audio Stash.
Thanks so much.
It's tough talking to kids about marijuana, especially if you might be a parent who dabbled a time or two in your youth. So to help you out, get your copy of Dr. Mitch Earleywine's latest book, A Parent's Guide to Marijuana. Dr. Earleywine is an associate professor of psychology at the State University of New York at Albany and an expert on the studies concerning marijuana, its effect on health and society, and the methodology behind the statistics. He is a frequent guest here on our daily audio stash. Dr. Earleywine lays it all out without the propaganda and scare tactics that parents know won't work with teenagers. He presents a rational understanding of cannabis, what it is and what it isn't, and why kids shouldn't be using marijuana. You can order today through Amazon.com or check our links at our blog, stash.normal.org.
Hey tokers, this is Radical Russ. There's only one thing I love as much as fine Oregon bud, and that's spicy food so hot it'll peel paint. Thanks to the generous sponsorship of HerbageDesigns.com, I'm putting both my true loves to the test to support the launch of NORML Show Live. It's the El Jefe Chicken Hot Wings Eating Contest Friday, August 28th here in Portland, and the contest benefits the American Red Cross, another favorite charity of mine. You can help. We're signing up pledges for the contest starting as low as 25 cents per wing, up to the 20 wings I'm pledging to eat. You can win, too. The top money entry and a randomly selected entry win Herbage prizes and one of my Starfish Designs Gandalf-style pieces of glass art. Send in your entry to stash@normal.org with the subject Hot Wings Contest and tell me how much you'll pledge per wing, up to 20 wings. Also include your real name, age, and shipping address should you win the prize. Only entries from adults 18 and older will be accepted. Starfish Designs prizes will not be shipped to Idaho, Pennsylvania, or Indiana.
The battle to end adult marijuana prohibition can sometimes seem endlessly frustrating and impossible to overcome. One way we bond as a community and draw strength to continue is by rejuvenating our spirit through art and music. The Marijuana Music Awards exist to recognize those sonic artists in all genres of music who feature a ganja-friendly message to motivate and inspire all the cannabis community. Our daily Toker tunes, brought to you by MarijuanaMusicAwards.com, feature the finest in blues, rock, jazz, hip-hop, rap, reggae, country, bluegrass, and dance music to enhance that 420 feeling and refresh all you stashers for another day on the front lines of the drug war. Enjoy this cut from MarijuanaMusicAwards.com and visit our blog at stash.normal.org to learn how you can vote for your favorites and enter your Toker tunes in the 2009 Marijuana Music Awards.
For Reggae Wednesday, we're listening to Roll Up That Spliff by 2008 Global Marijuana Music Awards reggae winners, Ja Roots. Recently, after 8 years of being a hugely successful group, Ja Roots decided to take an indefinite hiatus to pursue their solo projects. This month, former lead singer Josh Heinrichs has released a solo album called Things Change. Ja Roots had great success as a band, achieving a number of chart-topping hits, several CDs, and a local and international following. The band worked with many reggae greats, including Junior Marvin, Damian Marley, Bunny Wailer, George Clinton, and Stephen Marley. For more about Ja Roots, check out myspace.com/Ja Roots. And enjoy today's Daily Toker tune for Reggae Wednesday. It's Roll Up That Spliff by Ja Roots.
On the brain, you know we like it. That spliff and made me lay. The healing of our pain, you know you can't deny it. That spliff and made me lay. Burn it up if you really, really never try it. That spliff and made me lay. Roll up them weed and yes, we taking another kind. See now the higher meditation burning all across the nation. For some it is the medication, talking about the cancer patient, good for any stressful situation, a negative that you facing, yeah. We're singing a song about the weed, because it is so good, it is indeed. No matter what you have been told or what you've been led to believe, so light up a fat spliff, regardless of police. And pass it over here and let me take a hit. Please roll up the
sleep and make me lay. Roll up the sleep and make me lay.
The meditation on the brain, you know we like it.
Roll up the sleep and make me lay.
The healing of our pain, you know you can't deny it.
Roll up the sleep and make me lay.
Burn it up if you really, really never try it.
Roll up the sleep and make me lay.
Roll up some weed and yes, we're taking another kind of person.
Don't mood all like this. I've been no girl in the pocket. Come make we go easy together. Talk about things that matter.
Meditation on the brain, you know we like it. The healing of our pain, no you can't deny it. Burn it up if you really, really never try it. Roll up the weed, yeah. So you take these words from me, yes, and go and get some green. Cause we overgrow, not overthrow, you know we can achieve the hopes and dreams of a man who's known as Mark Emery. Him go to jail for life, yes, for fighting for the weed.
And sometimes, you know, it's hard to take the rap for the earth. In prison cells, you know, so this is not what they deserve. Roll up the sleep and make me lay.
The meditation on the brain, you know we like
roll
it.
Roll up the sleep and make me lay.
Burn it up if you really, really never try it.
Roll up the sleep and make me lay.
The healing of our pain, no you can't deny it.
Roll up the sleep and make me lay.
Roll up some weed and yes, we're taking another kind, eh?
Have you considered medical marijuana? Double-blind, peer-reviewed studies have found cannabinoid therapies to be successful in treating the symptoms of Alzheimer's disease, ALS or Lou Gehrig's disease, brain cancers, chronic pain, diabetes mellitus, dystonia, fibromyalgia, GI disorders, hepatitis C, HIV/AIDS, hypertension, incontinence, MRSA, multiple sclerosis, osteoporosis, pruritus, rheumatoid arthritis, sleep apnea, and Tourette's syndrome, as well as anecdotal evidence suggesting relief from anxiety, depression, and post-traumatic stress, plus reduction in the need for narcotic painkillers. Side effects of medical marijuana can include euphoria, relaxation, anxiety, panic reactions, paranoia, tachycardia, dry eyes, dry mouth, concentration and reaction time impairment, appetite increase, and in 37 states, arrest and incarceration. But medical marijuana is non-toxic and cannot cause overdose. Medical marijuana. It's not for everyone, but ask your doctor if medical marijuana may be right for you. The effects of marijuana prohibition are felt by all Americans in every walk of life, regardless of race, creed, color, religion, party politics, social status, wealth, gender, sexual orientation, or even one's use or non-use of marijuana. As the marijuana smokers lobby, NORML hears the stories of these average Americans and brings them to the attention of our policymakers and our fellow citizens in this segment we call NORML Newsmakers. We're joined by Dr. Sunil Aggarwal, who's a fourth-year medical student at the University of Washington, and glad to have you here on the show, Sunil. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me here.
This was something that came across our email desk here at Normal, and it's a look at cannabinoid medicine and kind of a little bit of a look at the history of it, but also the future. You know, what's happening now in the future of cannabinoid medicine. And Dr. Aggarwal, I've got to, I'm really curious about this because according to the drug czar, marijuana has no medicinal value, so it should be an open shut case, right?
Exactly. From his perspective, it seems like the verdict is in, and there's no medical use. But that contradicts so many hundreds of years of science and experience and modern science. So.
Well, when we're talking about cannabinoid medicines, of course, you're talking more than just the eating or smoking or vaporization of raw plant marijuana. We're getting more into detail about the chemistry of it and the different parts of the marijuana. What would you like doctors out there to know about cannabinoid medicines that they haven't been getting taught in medical school?
Well, yes, that's a great point. The fact is that this field of understanding about the chemicals that are in cannabis and how they interact in the body has just started to explode in the last couple of decades. There's now 15,000 articles in the literature on chemistry and pharmacology of cannabis and cannabinoids. And since the early 1990s, when we started to understand how exactly the chemicals in cannabis interact with the body, specifically the receptors involved, called cannabinoid receptors, there's been an explosion of literature in the field of what these cannabinoid receptors are doing in the body. So doctors should know that this is an area that's really hot, and that there's actually a scientific basis to kind of the folk medicine and the historical claims that we've known for a long time from people's experience about how cannabis is used, let's say, to relieve nausea. Well, yes, because there's cannabinoid receptors in it, part of the brainstem that are involved in the nausea or emesis circuit. Mm-hmm. That they reduce a certain type of sympathetic, parasympathetic tone that reduces some of the nausea. Some of these things are what physicians haven't been versed in, as kind of the mechanisms of cannabinoid medicines acting on the cannabinoid receptors of the body. So they should know that would be a great place to start, and then just them knowing that there's options for them to utilize to target that system for the betterment of their patients by offering their patients medicines that are cannabinoid based, and cannabinoid botanicals are affordable, effective, and in 13 states legally available. So that's certainly a good place to start.
We've seen 3 different cannabinoid-based medicines that have been approved in various places in the world: the Sesamet, Marinol, and Sativex or Sativex. I always am never sure how to pronounce all those, but those 3 have been approved. It seems to me that we're also seeing some look at medicines that specifically work with the cannabinoid agonists and antagonists. There was that Acomplia drug that came out a while back. What do you think of the current state of this research toward cannabinoid medicines, and could you say something to the effect about them trying to remove the psychological or psychopharmacological effect of it, the high of it? It seems like they're trying to make these drugs and take away the high.
Well, the fact is, it's very difficult to engineer in cannabinoid medicine in such a way that you try to totally either block out a receptor completely or totally stimulate the receptor completely. Doing one or the other seems to somehow often lead to untoward effects. So the example you gave about Acomplia, which was a cannabinoid receptor blocker, what we found out from the clinical studies is that this actually was people dropped out because it started to unmask some major psychiatric symptoms, and in some cases people developed multiple sclerosis in the trials. And what taught us is actually how powerful, how central a role the cannabinoid system plays in regular bodily homeostasis. And so if you start to really go off the deep end and overstimulate or overblock these receptors, you can have some negative results. So what that teaches us is that we've got to start thinking about what are called partial agonists, things that don't completely have the full activity at the receptor. But in some cases, it's kind of a shotgun approach. Sometimes you have multiple different cannabinoids that are partially active, partially blocking. And that's kind of certainly what the cannabinoid, the cannabis, which is a cannabinoid botanical medicine, that's what it already has built into it by Mother Nature 38 million years ago. So there's something to be said for that, instead of the magic bullet, people are calling it sort of the magic shotgun approach, having multiple targets and multiple strengths of effects. And yeah, the whole idea of blocking the high and this sort of thing, I mean, what decades of research in what's called social pharmacology has taught us is that any psychological effect that you get by or psychoactive effect you get from a drug is hugely dependent on the setting and the psychological makeup of the person. It's not just something that you have a chemical that's going to always get everybody in a different mental state. And that's the problem. We start thinking about it in that dimension, and really you'll end up really not properly taking that into account. So sometimes mood elevation will occur, can occur rapidly, but that's not necessarily a bad thing if someone's currently in a very depressed state. So I think it has to be done on a case-by-case basis. Certainly, sometimes you don't want too much psychoactive effect in a medicine, because then a person won't be able to function. So, and there should be a range of options available that kind of allow us to predict maybe which ones will be a little bit more psychoactive than others. And like I said, that's going to be based on the psychological makeup of the person, the setting that they're in, whether they're using it as a medicine or as a recreational drug. And hopefully we'll be able to kind of engineer it like that. But the idea that we're going to be able to take one cannabinoid that's going to sort of fix the whole thing and do everything that medicinal cannabis can do, that's a foolish notion.
Okay. Well, and another thing, I'm looking at your paper right now, and you have this great graph that I wish I could just take to the drug czar, because they always say, well, there's no scientific evidence, there's no medical use for cannabis in any way. And yet you've got this great bar graph, and it dates back to 1960 and then takes us all the way up to, recent times, very recent. And it shows how many cannabis or cannabinoid articles were found in the medical literature. And what I thought was interesting on first glance of this is how the graph kind of rises up until about 1973, and then it dips down throughout the 80s and early 90s, and then through the late 90s and 2000s it rises quite a bit. It almost parallels the graph for the popular support for legalization of marijuana. I was wondering if you saw that similarity, and what you think about these medical articles and more medical interest in cannabis with regard to that subject of overall legalization.
I think waves of understanding is what brings kind of social acceptance. And the first wave of understanding in 1964 was when Raphael Mechoulam, researcher in Israel, discovered the chemical structure of tetrahydrocannabinol and cannabidiol, two of the major components of cannabis. Up until that time, nobody even knew what they looked like chemically. And there was a period of interest in a lot of articles that came out. And then there was a drop in that during the 80s, and then in the 90s there was a discovery of the cannabinoid receptor. Actually, there was a receptor that was discovered. I think it was 1989, 1990. Lynn Howlett was the researcher there, and all of a sudden there was an explosion of interest in the field again. They're like, well, what is this cannabinoid receptor doing in the brain? And they looked for the chemicals in the brain and the body that actually bind to that. So it's kind of those troughs and peaks correspond to kind of our breakthroughs in the field of cannabinoid medicine. And now, throughout the 90s, there's just been a growing interest because we're learning more and more about what an important function these cannabinoids system plays in regulating mood, memory, appetite, pain, immunity, inflammation, neuroprotection, even cancer prevention. In some cases, stimulating neural stem cells to become new neurons in the brain. I mean, it's a huge wide open field, and it's as we've gotten more comfortable with understanding how cannabinoids work in the body, I think people are getting more comfortable with, okay, yeah, it makes sense to stimulate yourself or to take medicines that have cannabinoids naturally occurring in them. And so I think just as now all these, since the 90s, as you know, mid-90s, there's been so many states that have now permitted the medical use of cannabis. So I think that's had a huge impact on getting people comfortable with the idea that that we can sort of have a legal place for this plant in our society.
You know, as I think about medical marijuana and how it's progressed since Prop 215 in 1996, one thing that always impresses me about the medical use of cannabis is how broad a set of conditions and circumstances that it can be helpful for. We've seen it get numerous studies on neuropathic pain for people with nerve damage, AIDS patients, and so on. Its antiemetic effects, help for people with chronic migraines, psychological disorders like post-traumatic stress, and so on. So as we develop more understanding of these cannabinoid receptors in the brain, and we understand more about the parts of the cannabis plant, the cannabinoids, and how they work together, what would you see for the future as far as the development of these medicines? And could we expect cannabinoid medicines to cover even more set of circumstances, more symptoms out there than are currently being used?
Yes, no question about that. As we begin to realize what role they have in the body, it'll be used in multiple kind of medical frameworks. So not just curative for when you've gotten already sick, and how to sort of make yourself feel a little better by relieving nausea or chronic pain, but also in a preventative fashion as well. How not to get not to build plaques in your brain, how to slow the progression of a chronic disease, like multiple sclerosis or Lou Gehrig's disease. The kind of a different framework of its use will I think come to be more accepted, and I think the range of options available in terms of cannabinoid therapies will grow, and hopefully not just from laboratories, but also from medicinal plant sort of production facilities, which will be able to utilize it's very cheap to grow plants, so rather than sort of make a drug from the very beginning, so we can sort of utilize the fact that nature has this huge genetic diversity in the cannabis plant. So hopefully people will do more research to determine different types of strains that will be effective for different types of these types of conditions that I'm mentioning. And so hopefully those will be a range of options available for people, and then those when strains are found effective for a certain set of conditions like prevention of seizures, that those strains can be shared with people in other parts of the world. So it's kind of I think there's a huge botanical medicine development that will occur, and certainly your knowledge will grow to treat different range of conditions, not just in the acute setting, but in a chronic setting as well.
Oh, that sounds like a wonderful future. Now, if we can just convince Gil Kurlikowski. Dr. Sunil Aggarwal is a fourth-year med student at the University of Washington in Seattle, Washington, and joins us here on the Stash from time to time to give us some of his expert knowledge. And Sunil, are you going to be at the NORML conference this year?
Oh my goodness! I have to take an exam that weekend for medical licensing, so I'm unfortunately going to have to pass up this year's. But I will be at the Seattle Hemp Fest in August, and be happy to talk to anybody there who decides to come to that largest cannabis rally in the world.
That's right in your backyard. Seattle Hemp Fest, about 150,000 to 200,000 people at Myrtle Edwards Park, third weekend of August every year. He'll be there. I'll be there. You can talk to us there. Doctor, thank you for joining us here on The Stash, and have yourself a great day.
You too.
Thank you for downloading the NORML Daily Audio Stash, the growing truth about cannabis. We are produced by the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws in Washington, D.C. Our executive producer is Alan St. Pierre. Our deputy director is Paul Armentano. Our webmaster is Brian Judy. And web production is provided by Red Aphid Interactive Media. As always, you can catch up on the latest information about marijuana at www.norml.org. And you can interact and download from our Audio Stash blog at stash.norml.org. For everyone here at NORML, I'm your host, Radical Russ Belville, hoping all your harvests are bountiful and your encounters with law enforcement are non-existent. We leave you today with a look forward on our NORML calendar of events, which you can get at norml.org/calendar. This Friday at 11 Eastern, 8 Pacific, you can catch Cannabis Common Sense from Portland, Oregon.
the show that tells the truth about cannabis on Ustream.tv. I'll be appearing as a guest. Check it out for 1 hour on Ustream.tv, 11 o'clock every Friday night. And this Saturday, we have a benefit concert in Florida. This will be at Peters Road in Plantation, Florida, Saturday, August 1st at 8 p.m. local time. This is for People United for Medical Marijuana and NORML in the state of Florida to raise money for the medical marijuana petition. More details are available from our NORML calendar at norml.org/calendar. If you'd like your chapter's events posted on the National NORML calendar, send me an email at stash@norml.org and I'll get you the instructions for creating your shared Google Calendar. From 104-degree Portland, Oregon, take care of each other, tokers.